Are you exhausted in ministry? Are you tired? Ministry is exhausting. Sometimes I think about if I wasn't at church every week, how much more energy I would have. And I know that, the energy that I spend at church is well spent. But I spend a lot of energy thinking about church things mentally, physically being in the space, as I'm sure you do, right? You spend a lot of energy on your ministry. And I think, as you're going to find out at the end of this video, that there is a good reason for that. But before we get to the good reason that we feel exhausted, let's just talk about a few ways that you can feel less exhausted in your worship ministry. Why do you feel exhausted? Well, one of the reasons is that we feel that every single service, every single Sunday, needs to be bigger and better than the last one. Have you ever felt like you were on that perpetual hamster wheel of worship service improvement? Or maybe for you, it's specifically the holiday seasons like Easter and Christmas. And you always think, whenever you're planning those services, what did I do last year and how can I make it even bigger and better? What cool creative element can I put in there? What cool new worship song can I do? But I'm here to tell you, not everything has to be bigger and better than last week. You don't always have to one-up yourself, because you can't. You can't make every week bigger and better than the last, and that's why we feel exhausted, because we are trying to reach an unobtainable goal instead of focusing in on what the purpose of our corporate worship gathering is and leaning in to those reasons. It's not to entertain people. We try to make things bigger and better whenever we are seeking to entertain people, because people need that extra dopamine hit, right? That's the buzzword right now, dopamine, right? So I'll just say dopamine 45 times in this video. But people need, if we're trying to entertain them, they need that next level. You know, the movies in the 50s weren't gory enough, so we added a little bit more gore to them. And then in the early 2000s, we made things really bloody. And then the movie Saw came out, and we made it even bloodier. I'm not sure why I'm using that as an example, but I just did. When we're trying to entertain people, we need to make things bigger and better, but we are not entertaining people on Sunday mornings. We are leading them in corporate worship. We are leading them in a response to God, and we are leading them in a relationship with each other. When you get together with your friends, do you make every gathering bigger and better than the last? Or do you just come and know that you're going to be with people that you love and enjoy hanging out with, and know that you will receive a benefit from it, not because of anything that you're doing, but because you are with those people? I think there's this group of guys that I get together with every Wednesday morning for breakfast. We meet at the same place, at the same time, every single Wednesday. We've been doing it for like the past 5 or 6 years probably. When I meet with them, I get the same thing to eat. I drink the same coffee. We sit in the same spot. Not every time we gather is bigger and better, because that's not the purpose of the gathering. The purpose of us gathering together is that we are there to encourage each other. And we do that consistently. Consistency is more powerful than bigger and better. So if you have been on the treadmill of bigger and better, hop off, identify what the purpose of the corporate worship gathering is, and then do those specific things every single week. And that is how the sanctification process happens over a long period of time for the people in your church. Now, when it comes to exhaustion, it's not just the way that we think about things, but it is also our weekly routines. And so another thing that makes us exhausted is we focus so much on the little details, the little minutia that take up so much of our time and provide so little return on investment. I talk about this rule all the time on my channel in different contexts, but the 80-20 rule talks about, really, it's about how 80% of the results come from 20% of our work. And so when we apply that to our worship ministry, there are a lot of things, 80% of things, that only get us 20% of the results that we're looking for. And we spend all of our time on those 80% of things instead of the 20% of things that get us 80% of the results. Now, let's put some skin and bones on those numbers, on the 80% and the 20%, because I want to be really clear on what those mean so that we can stop doing the things that don't matter and start doing the things that do matter. Let's talk first about the 80% of things that don't really matter. How long have you spent trying to pick out the perfect font for the lyric slides for your service? Have you ever done that? Have you gone through? I mean, I think this is kind of one thing that we do one time, but it took a really long time. We sit down and we're like, that one looks good, but this one's got a little bit on it. That's just something different that I like. And this one's a little bit easier to read. This one looks a little cooler though. And next thing we know, an hour and a half has gone by and we've just cycled through a list of fonts on our computer. Or maybe you do the graphic design at your church and you're creating Facebook posts and promotional materials. I know a lot of worship leaders do that, and you sit down and you do the same thing. You're messing with all these different elements for this one announcement that's going to be made one time that people aren't even going to read because they're just going to go to your website and look at your calendar anyways. And we spend 3 hours on this one announcement for this one event that is for, 25% of our church. Or how about, because live streaming has been more and more accessible these days, how about dialing in the bit rate for your live stream when you know that 3 people watch your live stream? Or spending all your time figuring out, how am I going to have multiple camera angles for my church service? And then have you actually gone to your live streaming software, Facebook or YouTube or wherever you live stream, and seen how many people actually watch your live stream? I don't have anything against live streaming. We live stream at my church, but I didn't spend 45 hours getting all the tech set up. So start thinking whenever you're doing a task, is this the 80% that gets me 20% of the results? Or is it the 20% of things that gets me 80% of the results? Let's talk about some of those things. What belongs in the 20%? Number 1, preparing to lead your church on Sunday. I know that there's a lot more to it than just leading on a Sunday morning as being a worship leader, but the reason that preparing to lead on Sunday morning fits into that category of the 20% is because that is the one time a week where you will have the chance to impact the most amount of people. So it makes sense that if we put more time into those things, then we will reap more benefit from it. Number 2, I think pouring into your worship team members, the people who directly report to you as their leader. You can spend an hour and a half trying to pick out the perfect font for your worship lyrics, or you can go grab coffee with someone from your worship team for an hour and a half, which is more productive in the long run. And I think ultimately it comes down to this. We like to make ourselves busy because it makes us feel productive. And then we complain about how busy we are, even though we aren't actually being productive a lot of the time. I've heard it said before that busyness is laziness in disguise. And I know that some people don't like that phrase, but busyness is laziness in disguise because we haven't taken the time to actually identify what is important and where we should be spending our time. And so we just do this scattershot approach where we focus on a million different things, whether they're getting us the results that we want to get or not. And we're being lazy because we're just doing all the things instead of taking the time to focus and do the few amount of things that actually really matter. So don't just be busy, be productive. And when you are actually productive, you won't be as overwhelmed. The third thing that makes us exhausted in our worship ministries is that we don't know what our responsibilities actually are. This kind of relates to the last point, but do you know what your responsibilities really are as a worship leader? Do you know why you are serving at your church? Have you actually written down your top 5 responsibilities? And then you commit to doing those 5 things and letting the other things not necessarily fall to the wayside, but you don't put as much time into the things that are not your top priorities. But the thing is that we don't know our responsibilities a lot of times. When you are confused about what to do, you waste time doing everything. And so I can't give you your responsibilities for you because I think it's a little bit different at every church, but I'll just tell you what I view some of my responsibilities as. Number 1, getting ready for Sunday morning. That is tech-wise, that's scheduling volunteers, that is preparing the worship set, which takes up a large amount of that time of preparing for Sunday morning. It's also leading my people in worship, not just playing songs, but thinking through speaking transitions and how all of the different elements of the service are going to function together to lead people where we want them to go, where God wants them to go for Sunday morning. It's also pouring into my worship team, meeting with them regularly, making sure that they have the resources that they need, making sure that I'm helping spiritually guide them. And really, I mean, I'm part-time at my church, so if I was full-time here, I'd probably have a few more responsibilities. But in general, that's it. Of course, there are a few things that pop up from time to time which fall under my responsibility, but I understand that I'm here at my church to lead people in worship, whether that's on a Sunday morning or at some other event outside of Sunday morning, and it is to develop the worship team. So that's where I focus most of my time, especially because I'm part-time. Have you gone through that process for yourself? Like, what are your actual responsibilities? Like, if I didn't do these things, I would be fired tomorrow. Because it's probably not spending an hour and a half picking out the perfect font for your worship song lyrics. And of course, I couldn't make this list without mentioning that you are exhausted because you have trouble saying no to things. Do you have trouble saying no to things? Just try it with me here. Just say it in the quietness of wherever you are right now. Just say no. 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 There's freedom in that word. And I could give you the, every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So if you say yes to everything, you say no to your family at home, you say no to pouring into people outside of the church. We know that, right? But it is true. Whenever you say yes to something, you say no to something else. But what I want to talk about is in relation to everything else that we've just talked about. When we don't say no to things, we get off track of what our actual priorities are. We get off track of what our responsibilities are. And we take that list of 5 responsibilities that are actually our job description and we throw it in the trash. Or maybe we just hide it under a stack of papers of other to-do list things that we shouldn't even be doing because somebody comes and asks us to help out with something that is outside of our area of ministry, or there's just a million things that happen in the church. And not that you can't help with those because, obviously we want to be servants in our church, but we need to make sure that we focus on our priorities and we need to take care of ourselves so that we aren't exhausted. So if you have said yes to 5 other things that aren't your responsibility and they are causing you to be exhausted, I'm giving you permission to start saying no to those things. And I want to be careful in how I say that because I know how that can come off. But I think it's true. Like, you probably shouldn't be working 80 hours a week in your church. I don't know if you should be working 60 hours a week in your church. That's a lot. You need to rest. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Ministry is a marathon, not a sprint. So don't feel like you have to do all the things at one time. Learn how to say no and stay focused on the things that God has called you to. Now, I told you I would give you a good reason in why you're exhausted. And obviously, exhaustion doesn't feel good in the moment. And maybe exhaustion isn't the word. Maybe it's just tiredness is a good thing. Feeling the weight of ministry can be a good thing. And that's because the Bible tells us that leaders in the church will give an account for the people that they have been called to lead. And that is a burden that we are bearing. And we're supposed to bear that, right? I would hope that we feel the weight of that. Hebrews 13:17 says, "Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you." I wrote that second part because I think sometimes people don't let us do it with joy and not groaning. But the point is, you have to give an account for the people that you lead. And so there is this weight that we should be feeling, and sometimes that leads to exhaustion. And we feel the pressure I think we feel the pressure of the sanctification process, and we think that it relies on us. And the sanctification process, people being made into the image of Jesus, is not something that's going to happen all at once, but it happens over time, over a long period of time, over somebody's entire life. And so we feel the need to rush the sanctification process, but it is not our ingenuity and great ideas that sanctifies people. It is the Spirit of God. And how does the Spirit of God work? The Spirit of God works through the reading and studying of His Word. The Spirit of God works through the power of prayer. The Spirit of God works through the relationships that we have with the people in our church. And it happens over this long period of time. And we feel exhausted a lot of the times, I think, because we're trying to get to the end point of the sanctification process by the end of the year instead of by the end of somebody's life. And we think that that time period relies on us. So take a deep breath, feel the weight, feel the burden, but feel the responsibility that God has placed on you as a leader in your church. Take a deep breath. Know that He has placed His Spirit in you. Start saying no to some things. Start focusing on the things that are actually going to move forward the process of sanctification, of equipping the saints for the works of ministry. And then breathe out. Schedule Sunday off a month from now. And I hope that that brings some relief to the exhaustion that you feel. Now, another reason that we feel exhausted sometimes is because we don't have a plan for our worship ministry, and we're just flying by the seat of our pants, running at the last second to try to get everything done. So I want to give you something to help you right now to overcome the exhaustion in your worship team ministry. It is the worship rehearsal blueprint. I'll link it down in the description below. It is a complete step-by-step process for your worship rehearsal that will help you lead your team well spiritually, musically, and relationally, so that they can be prepared to lead worship on Sunday, but also grow closer to God and grow closer to each other. It's just a step-by-step template that you can implement this week to have the perfect worship rehearsal. So check that out down in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Till I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.